and welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. I am so grateful that you're here. My name is Kim Menninger, and I'm a women's leadership coach. I started this podcast because as a lifelong sufferer of imposter syndrome and a coach who sees this in 98% of the women I meet, I wanted to take this conversation to a bigger stage, so to speak. Imposter syndrome is triggered by a lot of things, but two of the primary triggers are transitions and feeling different from those around us. Women in traditionally male-dominated environments experience these triggers on an almost daily basis, so it's only natural that we would feel this way. What compounds these feelings is the sense that we are alone. The belief that if we share our feelings, we'll expose our incompetence even further. So we carry it around like a deep, dark secret. I started this podcast because I want to put a stop to this nonsense and destigmatize imposter syndrome. Because we don't talk about it, we look around and assume that everyone around us has it all figured out, that we're somehow the exception to the rule, when in reality, we're all feeling this way. And when we can own that and say it out loud, we all benefit. Nobody more so than you. So thanks again for being here. If you enjoy it, please share it with others who might also benefit. Welcome, Christina. I am so glad to be talking with you today. I'd love to start by learning a little bit more about you.
Yes, Kim, thanks for having me on today. My name's Christina Kwan. I am a coach with my company, The Road Uncovered Coaching. I actually came to be a coach after about a decade and a little bit more in the financial services industry. And I'm here to help people feel better about themselves now and for always.
Wonderful. And I'd love to ask my standard starter question, which is, what does imposter syndrome mean to you? And then beyond that, how, if at all, has it shown up for you in your life or in your work?
Yes. So imposter syndrome to me means that level of fear that you first have from doing something that you've never done before, or that you don't have as much experience doing. So in my experience, imposter syndrome has shown up in my career in financial services. So my little, backstory is that I started as a contractor at my last company, which was a major financial firm. And I actually worked through and climbed the ladder in 6.5 years and made it to VP, which is the position that I left when I left the company last year. And for a rise that was so quick, there's just no way to get away with, having imposter syndrome or feeling like a little bit inadequate at every new promotion, every new position that I held. So I think imposter syndrome is a really natural part of growth. I think it's actually an essential part of growth, because what it means is that your comfort zone is being, you are stepping out of your comfort zone. You're stretching your outer limits, and the feeling of fear and nervousness and this imminent sort of feeling of imminent failure is part of the process of becoming a better version of yourself.
Yes, I love that. And I want to go back to what you were talking about in terms of growing your career very quickly. I think that is a very natural trigger when there's sort of a very quick and steep ascent, because like you said, it doesn't give you time to process, get comfortable, plateau a little bit before you pick up again and start something new. So how did you manage that? I mean, were there particular strategies that you used? Like how did you work through it?
That's interesting, because I don't think at the time that I thought that I could have a strategy. So it's a really great question. I think at the time, it was really about surviving every day, because the imposter syndrome was so prevalent at every stage. I was doing something new. There were a lot more expectations, higher expectations at every new position. So a big part of it was just sort of staying calm in the face of my peers and my boss and my superiors, and especially my clients, having sort of in this sense a professional demeanor, even though inside it's all butterflies and just a very deep level, I would say, of insecurity, because when you're going to that next stage of your career, you don't have all of the answers. You don't have the benefit of years of experience in that particular position or even in certain functions to rely on. So there is a level, a certain sense of that question, like, do I really belong here? Do I deserve to be here? And I think what I had to keep coming back to is that there was a reason why, my team put me in the positions that they did. There were a lot of different factors, like a lot of turnover in my company, and especially in my team, because I worked in collateral management, and it's kind of a specialized part of the field, because there are specific rules, and it's sort of like a byproduct of having to do business in the financial services industry, but it's also very important for ensuring that companies keep their risks low and as low as possible. So I would say the way that I managed it was by every day reminding myself about why I deserved to be where I was, why my team needed me in that particular moment. And as much as I could, dust myself off from any, I would say, quote unquote tragedies that have happened in the past. Even if it was like, an hour ago, I might have said something that I felt was really embarrassing. And whether or not it was in actuality, because I could never tell, right, based on other people's reactions or the response that I get from my client, no one's ever going to say to me, wow, Christina, that was really dumb for you to say. And so it's really a matter of your own self-perception of your own performance. And I think a lot of being able to overcome imposter syndrome is about basically having a better opinion of yourself and your opinion, and your performance in that moment.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point too. I don't want to speak for everybody, but my mind can go to very dark places, especially when I'm anxious or feeling outside of my comfort zone. And so the dominant thoughts are always negative. And so I think just actively reminding yourself, reframing, however you do it, right? That there's a reason why I'm here. This is not a fluke, right? The people who chose to put me here didn't make some big mistake. Can certainly help.
Yes. And I think it's really important to, like you said, the dominant thoughts, they tend to skew negative. And I think once we realize that, it becomes even more important to double down on being able, on convincing ourselves. I don't want to say convincing. In terms of sort of like coaching ourselves or being our biggest cheerleader, right? Like our brains automatically want to go to the place where we're insufficient. And so I feel like it's so much more important for us to have our own back. And anytime we recognize that we are kind of going on this downward spiral where everything that we do isn't good enough, that's when we have to sort of flip the switch and say, okay, what is the other way that I can look at this? And in a way where we're not comparing ourselves to other people, because I think that's also another way that we can kind of get ourselves into trouble. Is one of the things that was difficult for me was, when I made it to VP, a lot of the VPs that were, in my company had been VPs for a long time, or they had worked for the company for a long time. And so, I had this sense that because I hadn't put in my time, quote unquote, that I didn't exactly deserve to be there. And I think what's so important is to be in our corner, be the person for ourselves that is going to really talk ourselves up in a sense. I mean, it sounds a little bit silly, but I feel like the brain wants to go to the negative. So we need to do our part to go to the positive.
Absolutely. And I want to ask you a question because you're a coach too. And you mentioned earlier about not being able to, well, this is my interpretation. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but essentially kind of putting a smile on your face and not really letting people in on how you are feeling. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the idea of faking it until you make it.
Yes. I actually don't like the idea of fake it till you make it. But there is a very distinct difference in my mind. So I think when we think of fake it till you make it, it's the sense where you're putting on a costume and you're showing up, trying your best to fit the characteristics of that costume. And I think that can really cause us a lot more drama than we really need, especially when we're trying every day to shoot for something better than we were yesterday. I think it's important for us to be real about where our insufficiencies are, what our deficiencies are, and what exactly we're feeling that is causing us to feel nervous about the task at hand. So I am more so a proponent of feeling your feelings. As silly as that sounds, it's sort of when you are feeling insecure to, I guess, be very aware of what that feeling feels like. So you're not trying to speed towards resolving or rather feeling a different feeling, if that makes sense. Where you, yes, like, so I think this is the case for a lot of things, really, not just imposter syndrome, but I think my clients especially get hung up when there is a negative feeling, if it's insecurity, if it's sadness, if it's loneliness. Our first instinct is to say like, oh, I don't want to feel that way, so let me try to do something else that's going to make me feel better. And that's when we tend to turn to food or alcohol, or in some cases in the like office setting, where we might go and talk to somebody else about the interaction that just happened that we didn't like, right? And I think it's so important for us to sit in the feeling, understand what it is like in our body and the thoughts that are causing that feeling. Like what is the cause of the insecurity? Is it necessarily just this overall general sense of inadequacy, or is there a specific reason that we are feeling inadequate? Is it the amount of information that we do or don't have? So for me at VP, for sure, as someone who was supposedly the head of my department, the implication is that I'm supposed to know everything. I should know all of the answers. And when I, basically took stock of my position and the skills and the knowledge required, I didn't know everything. And I had to be very honest with myself about that. And in some cases, honest with my team and my clients about that, in order to, be able to improve that and gain the knowledge that I actually did need to perform at that level.
Yeah. And what you're making me think about too is how just the negative feelings can serve a purpose if we look at them in a productive way. So I do think that there's a bit of a fear. We've been talking about the fact that when you step outside of your comfort zone, it triggers fear and anxiety naturally, right? And then on top of that, I think most of us who are high achievers, who are driven to succeed, have very high standards of ourselves. And so often what's going on in imposter syndrome is this sense of, I want to be the best, right? I want to prove that this was not a mistake. I want to perform at the highest possible level. And so we can think about some of those limiting beliefs more so from the perspective of, okay, does this belief or does this anxiety tell me anything about what potential action steps I could take to strengthen my experience or my skill set or my confidence in this situation, right? As opposed to it being this ambiguous energy that we really can't do anything with. It's more like what you're saying, right? There's a certain amount of expertise or information that you're expected to have. Typically, we put a lot more pressure on ourselves than that. But if you can really stop in the moment and ask yourself, okay, I'm really nervous that I'm going to fumble here in this meeting. What information do I actually need, right? And then what's the practical step to fill in that gap versus these very generic sweeping statements about how unprepared we are in general and how likely we are to fail in this particular role.
Yes. And I actually think that being real about how we feel is the key actually to us basically escalating or elevating ourselves to that I guess level of expertise and having that reputation faster than we would if we were to deny it.
Yes. I think that's where fake it till you make it breaks down, right? Because there's something to be said for substituting positive thoughts for negative thoughts, but you have to believe them, right?
Yeah.
It's not just arbitrarily inserting positive thoughts. You actually have to buy into them. And so how do you get there?
Yes. So one of the a big thing that I teach my clients is because I think we're told all the time in terms of confidence, like, just be confident, don't worry about it, just be confident. And the question is like, okay, but how do I do that? And that's where the concept of fake it till you make it comes around. But I think it's so much harder to go from negative directly to positive. So the thing that I like to, tell my clients is we work first towards going to a neutral place, because when you're trying to go from negative to positive, you're trying to combat, like argue with the negative thinking, which your brain wants to do. And your brain is really good at doing that. And so to try to argue with it is sort of like, I don't know if you have this experience, but how there are some people who they're kind of contrarian, and if you have a conversation with them, they enjoy the discussion, so they're always going to play devil's advocate, and there's no end to the argument, right?
Exactly.
That's where our brain takes us. Like if we try to argue for the positive, then our brain's just gonna completely like take us to the negative again and again and again. And I think what's so important is for us to get to the place where we're just neutral. It's okay for us to be who we are in the present moment. And I like one of the suggestions, or my tried and true, if there is a strategy for getting to neutral, is believing the thought, I am a person. Because it's believable, right? Like we can all believe that I'm a person. There's no quality attached to it. It's just simply, I am a person and I'm on this earth living my life. And if I can sit in that feeling, in my body and in my mind, how it feels to just be a person, then it's so much easier to get to the place where I'm amazing. I'm a rock star. I can do this. I know what I'm doing, that kind of stuff.
I like that a lot. I really like the idea of stopping in neutral first before trying to go directly from negative to positive. Is there anything else that you recommend to your clients or that you do for yourself when you find yourself in moments of self-doubt or when you see people struggling with these kinds of issues?
Yeah, I think the big thing that has been revolutionary for me is to realize that nothing has gone wrong when I have those feelings. I think, in my career, I was always intent on, I want to get to the place where I have enough information where I do feel completely secure and completely sure of myself that even if a client or a colleague were to question what I was saying, I would feel so completely confident that I could combat what they said. But you never reach that level of security, and I would say that it's important that we don't, because then we lose. Like, if we think that we're right all the time, then there's no chance for us to improve or grow or look at things differently if we have all the answers. So I think what has been really helpful for me is just realizing that there are just going to be times where I just don't feel all that great about myself. And that doesn't mean that I don't have talents, I don't have skills, and that I'm not, great at what I do. It's that in this current moment, I don't quite feel like that. And so for me, it's more of an opportunity to get curious. Like, where is that thought and feeling coming from? What is it that I'm thinking about myself that makes me feel insecure in this moment and like a fraud? And usually that gives me an idea of what I need to do next, instead of sort of stewing in this negative place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I think that really examining where is this coming from can be so much more helpful than trying to squash it or pretend like it's not there. I was thinking about what you were talking about too, with our natural tendency to compare ourselves to others, and then just through the way that we get intimidated in certain situations. I certainly hear a lot from people who equate confidence with preparation. There's this sense of, if I fully prepare, then I'm going to show up more confidently. And of course, in most of our minds, there's no way to measure preparation. So there's no way to feel like it's complete. And so we just keep on basically cramming for the exam as a way of preparing so that we're as confident as possible when we walk into the room, and all the while worrying that someone's going to catch us off guard. Someone's going to ask us questions. Someone's going to stump us in some way, right? And I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes. I totally understand the need to over prepare so that hopefully in the moment, we'll be as ready as possible to face whatever challenge we might be met with. Say if it's a presentation or a meeting or something like that. But I think a lot of things changed for me when I realized that if I just accepted the fact that it was a very real possibility that I could fall on my face. Like in 6.5 years, there was just especially in the field that I was in, there's no real like faking your knowledge in the area, because there are certain regulations that are just standard across the industry. So if you don't know them, then you just don't know them. And so there came a time where consistently I would be so worried about, giving the right impression. And so often what would happen is that I'd fall on my face, like, one way or the other, the conversation would take a turn into some area that I haven't studied yet, because we're talking about, it's not as though I have months and months to prepare. my road to VP was literally the entire time I was learning everything I could about collateral management. So inevitably, any conversation I found myself in, there was going to be some kind of gap. And what I realized is that, if I just accepted that there's going to be, like, there is a very real chance every single conversation I have every day that I come into work, that I could really literally fall on my face and make a total embarrassment of myself. It just sort of released me from the pressure of having to do everything perfectly. Because what I found is that, people appreciate so much more when you are willing to learn and willing to improve, willing to do whatever it takes to do a great job, as opposed to being steadfast in terms of your, like, in terms of having a very resolute opinion about how much you know or don't know. So I think that, being willing to fail and being willing to have it be apparent that I am failing has been a game changer for me.
I think too, what you're saying is making me think too that, like, rather than delude ourselves into thinking that there's an actual way to fully prepare for these kinds of situations that we're talking about, to instead imagine the worst case scenario, falling on your face, right? Not knowing the answer, getting blindsided by somebody, and then instead preparing for that, right? So if you are in a meeting and someone asks you a question that you can't answer, what are you going to do? What's your strategy for handling that? And then instead of focusing all this time on memorizing information, you're instead building your resilience and your coping skills, right?
Yeah. Yes, I completely agree with that, because I think that's the amazing thing about our human emotions, is that we're able to feel them ahead of time. So if you are able to imagine that worst case scenario, somebody asks you a question and you don't know, and you're a deer in headlights, and, I know exactly how my body would react. Like, I'm frozen, but at the same time, I'm shaking uncontrollably. And there aren't, I'm trying desperately to think of words, but words aren't coming in my brain. And so I think if we're able to, like you said, build that resiliency to the feeling, we'll realize that all it is a feeling, and that feelings change.
Exactly. Yeah. So what motivated you to want to tell your story today? And what are you hoping people will take away from it?
Yeah, I think imposter syndrome is just such an important topic for women, especially, to talk about and be real about. It's definitely something that I talk about with career women who, have this sense that they want to get rid of it. Like, there's always this idea that we'll reach some level of proficiency where we're just not going to feel that way. And I think that is a total lie. I think that it's like an urban legend that we could ever get to a place where we don't feel imposter syndrome. And so what motivated me was to really get the word out there for anyone who's listening to this, that it's not, a part of your personality that needs to be eradicated. I think it's a normal part of being a growing, and I'd even say, like, someone who's accelerating their growth. It's a very natural and essential part of that growth.
Thank you so much, Christina. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I'm sure others will too. And I really appreciate your taking the time to tell your story.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks again for listening today. If you're struggling with imposter syndrome and you'd like additional support, check out the show notes for more resources, or contact me directly. I would love to help you. And if you'd like to tell your story, I would love to interview you. You will find my contact info in the show notes, so reach out anytime. Thanks again.